Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Dale Matchek, Northwood University's chair of our economics programs.
This is a great night for Northwood University, and we're glad you could join us for this event. Obviously, we have a very special guest for you here tonight, and he is the author of this year's OmniQuest book. The OmniQuest is a program we have at Northwood University where we select an influential book, one that is influencing business leaders, one that has the potential to transform the way people think and act. And you can see on the slide here by previous selections that it's a pretty good reading list for our students. By the time they graduate, they've got a pretty good bookshelf there in addition to their studies. And we incorporate the OmniQuest into our coursework. We design assignments that incorporate the OmniQuest, and everybody, students, faculty, and staff, by reading this book, they really become a learning community, freshmen talking to seniors, seniors talking to staff and faculty, and faculty talking to each other. And the reaction to this year's OmniQuest was overwhelmingly positive. Obviously, the author, Arthur Brooks, wrote the book Love Your Enemies, and it's been a very timely and welcome addition to our OmniQuest bookshelf. So I want to introduce to you the president of Northwood University, and that's Dr. Kent McDonald, and he will be introducing tonight's speaker.
Well, good evening, everyone. This is a fabulous turnout, a sense of real satisfaction that less than 2 years ago we would have all been underwater with the flood. And the fact that we have gathered here, we've repaired most of the university. Janae Velasquez is here tonight. Just can't say enough about the Herbert H. and Grace A. Dow Foundation and what they've been able to do for Northwood and the community. So thank you. And thank you very much, Dale. I'll look forward to the interaction later. So on behalf of our chair, Dr. Jennifer Panning, I do want to, and all the trustees of Northwood, let me extend a very warm Northwood welcome to everyone here this evening. They include faculty and staff and students, trustees, friends of the university, and equally important, what we've been trying to do at Northwood is to fill in the moat and lower the drawbridge that often surrounds the university. And the fact that we've been able to attract so many people from the community is really great. Students, you look awesome up there. Thank you for joining us as well. So here we are on March 17th. There was a time in my life that I didn't really celebrate this day. The McDonalds came from the west coast of Scotland, and I grew up in Nova Scotia, which is Latin for New Scotland, and I grew up in a town called New Glasgow, named after Glasgow, Scotland. And so I grew up around kilts and bagpipes. It was a deep and rich Scottish culture. And even though I married Mary Ellen, she's a McPhee, they come from the west coast of Scotland, but she had deep Irish roots. I was still troubled in my youth about all the attention that the Irish would get on this particular day. And but I'm over it now. My moment of shift came when I was speaking with my dad. He was a Cape Breton, Nova Scotian, deep Scottish heritage, rich Catholic history. And he said, Ken, you need to get over it. And the reason for this is you have to celebrate a people that in the middle of Lent would put the biggest party of the year. And so here we are. We're celebrating March 17th, and I'm sure a few of us will enjoy a green beer later. So let me begin by thanking our friends at Dow, if I could. So Northwood University sits here on 400 acres, once owned by the Dow Chemical Corporation. And over 60 years ago, the executives of Dow said, we need a university in this amazing community. And so the rest is history. I want to thank Dow, its chairman and CEO, a friend of many of ours, Jim Fitterling, and the efforts of Heather Gallegos, a Northwood alum, who is also the Dow Community Relations Associate Director, who championed this inside of Dow to make this happen and helped us put this together. So Heather, thank you very much. This is our third year in Midland, and I've come to realize this, that Midland is one of America's great small cities. Northwood is Midland's university, and the positive relationship that we have with this city is in no small part a result of a passionate supporter, our mayor, Maureen Donker. And so, Maureen, to you and your city colleagues, I just want to, on behalf of the university, want to thank you for making this small city a beautiful place to raise a family, run a business, and lead a university like Northwood. So thank you very much for being here. Annette Glenn will be joining us. She's our state representative. She's trying to get here as quickly as possible from Lansing. She's a great Northwood supporter. She was very vocal in her support of Northwood and our position on what's happening in the Ukraine, so I'll look forward to saying hello to Annette shortly. There's many friends and colleagues I could recognize here tonight when we gather such a great group together. But let me take a moment to also extend a very warm Northwood welcome to Michigan's former Attorney General, 2 times Midland native, champion for our region, Dr. Bill Schuette. Bill. So Bill is also an author of a great book called Big Lessons from a Small Town, joined here with his wife Cynthia, and we're so pleased that you're here with us. But while I'm speaking about the Schuettes, I also want to welcome Bill Jr. Here. He's taken his time off from a busy campaign trail to be with us, to join us tonight. Bill, I want to thank you for your service to our country, first of all. And we wish you the very best in your campaign of freedom and families and future, and your efforts to win the 95th State Representative District. Good luck to you. So the dirty little secret about these events is that presidents actually don't have a lot to do other than to show up. And I need to honor the people who have actually put this together, our facilities team, our IT team, our marketing team, our communications team, for making this all come together, our office with Ann. And specifically, I want to recognize Dr. Tim Nash. Tim and Pam are watching this online tonight. It was Tim's efforts sitting down with Jim Fitterling months ago that came up with the dream to make this happen. So I want to recognize Tim. I also want to recognize Justin Marshall and his advancement team, Justin over there, who have been just incredible amount of effort. And finally, Carla Spaeth is our project director here in the back. And Carla, thank you for putting this together as well. And there's just 2 quickly additional people who are not here tonight, but they deserve to be recognized. A couple of weeks ago, Mary Ellen and I were in Florida. We were visiting Naples, and we spent a couple of days staying with and spending time with a great couple, beautiful human beings. And I raise this for a couple of reasons. Dr. Bill Stavropoulos and his wife, Linda. Bill, as many of you know, was the former Dow CEO, not once, but 2 times. And he asked me to send his best to Dr. Brooks tonight. He's someone, Dr. Brooks, Bill holds you in the highest regard. They know each other quite well from their time together at the American Enterprise Institute. And Bill hopes that you're doing well and welcomes you to Midland tonight. He was just angry that this couldn't be in June when they got back from the second person I do want to honor here tonight is just a couple of days ago I received an email from an iconic businessman, a philanthropist, and I'll say the DeVos name is synonymous with Northwood University. Just one example, of course, is the DeVos Graduate School of Management. Many of the students are here. Our Dean Lisa's here. We have 2 children from that school who graduated. Northwood University alumnus and great supporter Dick DeVos is out of state all week, but wishes he could be back on campus for this event. Dr. Brooks, Dick asked me to also send his very best to you. He wanted me to tell you that he's reading and very much enjoying your new book, From Strength to Strength. So he sends his best as well. Thank you. So I could go directly into introducing Dr. Brooks now, but this is a special moment in history that we're living right now. So let me just take you back to the time that I mentioned earlier when Northwood was founded. The phrase the Cold War was actually coined in 1945 by George Orwell. The Soviet expansion into the European coterminous countries had been taking place for over a decade before we began as a university. Socialism was on the rise, even in this country. And in 1957, Sputnik had just entered orbit. Arthur Turner and Gary Stauffer were professors at a traditional American college here in Michigan. They were young. They were young men. They had just been married. They didn't have a lot of resources. They had a lot to lose with the idea of launching a new American college. Yet neither was able to ignore what was going on in the world at that time. And so these 2 young had a dream, and they launched Northwood University in 1959. And what was going to separate it then separates us today. And that is this deep commitment to American enterprise, personal responsibility, limited government, rule of law, and maybe over anything else, freedom. These, in 1963, became what we know now as the Northwood idea. Doctors Turner and Stauffer would be saddened with what they see happening in Ukraine and other parts of the world today. And I raise this for a couple of reasons. First, as many of my colleagues know, my research has taken me around the world studying other universities from the Middle East and Africa, Southeast Asia, spent lots of time up in places like Kazakhstan, Europe, Latin America. And this is what the biggest thing I take away from my work overseas is that people are good. Around the world, people are good. Parents want their kids to have a free life, a happy life, a safe life, and for them to live a better life than they had. Over the past 2 decades, Northwood University has graduated more than 24 Ukrainian students and many, many young Russian students. All of them, when they graduate, they have gone on and represented the ideals of the university, or what I just referred to as the Northwood idea. It's a difficult time for all of them today, and our thoughts and prayers are with them and their families. Today, we have 3 students from Russia who are with us. And they grieve about what's going on in their country. And we think about them daily, their families, and all the Russian people who are appalled by their government and what they're doing in Ukraine today. They're part of our academic community, and we'll support them through this very difficult time. We also have a current Ukrainian student with us. Each morning, I reach out and connect with her father. The family is still in Ukraine, her mom, her dad, her younger brother, 14 years old, and their parents. They live in Kiev, not far from President Zelensky's presidential office. This morning, I told Irina's dad that this event was happening, the type of topic that we were going to address together from Dr. Brooks, and I asked him if he'd like to share anything with the audience. So he wrote to me this. He said, "Good morning, Kent. Thanks to God and the prayers of people all over the world, we have lived another day. Day 22. Who would have thought that Ukraine would have such a furious rebuff? we were only given 4 to 7 days. Thanks to the support of the whole world, especially the USA, and for that we will win. But the price of victory is too high. He goes on to say, good always triumphs over evil, albeit at such a high price. And he wishes all of you well. With us all here today, I'm not sure I've seen our great friend, Dr. Wally Mayton. Is Wally here yet? No. So if Wally was here, he would expect, and I would ask all of you to keep in your thoughts, and if you do pray, the good people of Ukraine, the good people of Russia, the good people of Poland, and all those suffering around the world tonight as a result of the military invasion of a sovereign Ukraine. They're all in our thoughts and prayers. And so Northwood, our commitment is one of action. We have to go beyond a hashtag Ukraine. And to date, Northwood community has raised several tens of thousands of dollars to help the people of Ukraine impacted by this war. And so should any of you in the audience be of interest to supporting our efforts, feel free to speak with one of my Northwood colleagues or myself. And so with that, let me shine a much brighter light, spotlight on the reason that we gather here in Reitma Arena this evening, and welcome to Northwood and to Midland, Dr. Brooks. And Dr. Brooks, I appreciate your patience while I made those remarks. Arthur C. Brooks is the William Henry Bloomberg Professor of the Practice of Public Leadership at Harvard Kennedy School and Professor of Management at the Harvard Business School. Before joining the Harvard faculty in July of 2019, he served for 10 years as the president of the Washington, D.C.-based American Enterprise Institute, one of the world's great think tanks. Brooks is the author of 12 books, including the #1 New York Times bestseller, From Strength to Strength, that I mentioned earlier, and national bestsellers, Love Your Enemies, published in 2019, our OmniQuest book that you heard about earlier, and The Conservative Heart, written in 2015. He's also published dozens of academic journals and a textbook written in 2008 called Social Entrepreneurship. He's a columnist for The Atlantic, host of the podcast, How to Build a Happy Life. Several of you earlier told me that you've listened to this quite a lot. And subject of the 2019 documentary film, The Pursuit, which Variety named as one of the best documentaries on Netflix in August of 2019. He gives more than 150 speeches a year, 3 yesterday. Not only here in America, but in Europe and Asia. We're so pleased that he's here to deliver one of those speeches to our community tonight. Previously, Dr. Brooks was the Louis A. Bandel Professor of Business and Government at Syracuse University, New York, where he taught economics and social entrepreneurship. Prior to his work in academia and public policy, he had a fascinating life, spending 12 years as a professional hornist, both in the United States and Spain. Dr. Brooks holds a PhD and a Master of Philosophy in Policy Analysis from the Party-Ran Graduate School. That's in beautiful Santa Monica, California. He also holds an MA in Economics from Florida Atlantic University in Boca Raton, Florida, and a BA in Economics from Thomas Edison State College in Trenton, New Jersey. So students, staff, faculty, and guests all, please give a warm Northwood welcome to our guest, Dr. Arthur Brooks.
Thank you. President McDonald, what a delightful and gracious introduction that was. What a wonderful opportunity it is to see this great university, this famous university with wholesome, good values that want to help America save the world. I'm so delighted to be here. I'm really honored to be here and to be with all of you. Thank you to the Mayor of Midland for joining us today, for all the faculty, and to my friends Bill Stavropoulos and Dick DeVos and so many other people that I've known who've come through this great school. You'll notice that I took special care in my wardrobe today. I'm wearing your school colors because I wanted to be one of you today. And I want to start by telling you why I want to be one of you. This is a well-known place, and you stand out in higher education today because this is a place dedicated to lifting up the country and lifting up the world with the ideas of a free society, with the ideas of free enterprise. Now, that might come sort of naturally to all of you, and you might not think about it very much, but let me tell you a thing or two as an economist about what that actually means, what that means to me as an American who's not connected every day with this university, but who loves this country and who loves our world. As an economist, one of the things I care about the most is how we can pull people out of poverty. When I was a kid, one of the things that we all knew is that there was no solution to poverty. When I was a little boy, I remember seeing pictures in the National Geographic magazine of people with flies on their face and a distended belly with a famine someplace in the world, maybe in East Africa. There was nothing we could do. Well, there was something we could do, because the truth of the matter is that in the time since I was a kid and today, poverty in the world has decreased by 80%. 2 billion of your sisters and brothers have been pulled out of starvation level poverty. What did that? United Nations? International Monetary Fund? The World Bank? USAID? No. 5 things pulled 2 billion of our sisters and brothers out of poverty since I was a kid. They were globalization, free trade, property rights, the rule of law, and capitalism. Entrepreneurial democratic capitalism, which is espoused and embraced by you. Now, it just seems like it's in the water, I know, here, but that's pulling people out of poverty, and it's working while you sleep, and there's no other system in the history of the world that's been able to do that. You are saving people around the world who need you because of your values. Why do we need Northwood University? Because we need more people graduating with these values, becoming leaders in our country and leaders in our world that are willing to fight for the poor. Thank you for doing that. I'm so honored to be here. And for those of you who are supporters of this university, I want you to know that we're paying attention to this all around the country, and this is a great investment. So thank you for supporting this with your time and your talent and your treasure as well. Now, one thing I want to talk about tonight is that not everybody agrees with me. Not everybody in America agrees with anybody, as a matter of fact. The biggest problem that we have in America today, in point of fact, is that we can't actually appear to get along on anything, and that's the subject of the book that you've been reading here as students, Love Your Enemies. Now, Dale, he said that, it was my title, I made that up. I actually didn't make that up, Jesus Christ made that up. I stole the title from the 5th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew in the New Testament of the Christian Bible, the 44th verse. Of course, most of you knew that. But that is an old teaching that needs a new day. If we're actually going to save this country, if we're going to bring people back together again, we need to learn how to do just that. That's what I want to talk about. I want to give you some new ideas on how you can actually bring this country together again. How you as young people, you as citizens, people of Midland, all of us can be the center of a new day and bringing America back together again. Now, I don't have to tell you the terrible statistics on how polarized we've become. The fact is that more than half of Republicans and more than half of Democrats in America think the number one threat to this country is their fellow Americans in the other party. That, my friends, is totally crazy and catastrophic. It is untrue, it's slanderous, and it's wrong and dangerous for this country. But I can't just say that. I got to do something about it. We have to do something about that. That's why I wrote the book, and that's why I'm talking now. So what are we going to do? Now, obviously, our attempts to bring people together haven't worked very well because we seem to get farther and farther apart. So we need a new kind of thinking. We need to think in a new entrepreneurial way. We have to look at this problem and see it as an opportunity, because that's what entrepreneurs do. The truth is, anytime you have a big problem, you got to come to a big epiphany if you want to solve it. You know this in your business life if you have a business. You know this as a student. When you're a student, you're trying to get through a homework assignment. You can't solve a particular problem, and boom, something comes to you when you're out for a walk or in the shower. Well, this is a problem that needs new kinds of thinking too. This is true in all parts of our life, by the way. I can think of an example here. I'll just share with you. I have 3 kids, and 5 years ago I had 3 teenage kids, which was, great. And my middle son, his name is Carlos. When he was a junior in high school, my wife and I were frequent flyers in the principal's office. I mean, it was just every week. And that was the same thing. Carlos wasn't living up to his potential in his grades. His grades weren't high enough. He was, getting C's and D's, and he might not pass his classes, and he might not graduate, and he was just terrible again and again and again. Grades problems, again and again. And finally, one day, my wife, Esther, who's an optimist, she said, we have to think about this problem in a whole new way. I said, I'm all ears. He says, at least we know he's not cheating. That's new thinking, right? By the way, if you wonder how that turns out, that Carlos Brooks is now Corporal Carlos Brooks, U.S. Marine Corps, forward deployed combat Marine. Thank you, Lord, is all I can say. Yeah. So let's get some new thinking about the problem of bringing America together again, and let's empower all of you to get into this fight, into the fight to bring us together. And let's start by actually diagnosing the problem. Now, I'm a social scientist, so I'm always looking for the work, the theory, the data behind the problems and the behaviors that we see in America today. And I remember when I first started to see the big problem that was coming at us, like a train that was coming down the tracks that was going to hit us. It was a long time before this was on most people's radar. It was in February of 2014, a long time ago now. And I was reading an article in a political science academic journal, a really long-haired thing, that most people wouldn't read for fun, but I was trying to sort of stay abreast of these trends. It was an article actually by 3 psychologists who are talking about something called motive attribution asymmetry. Motive attribution asymmetry. Now, that's really fancy sounding, but it's actually a really simple idea. This is what we academics do. We take a simple idea, give it fancy words, and get tenure. So what is motive attribution asymmetry? That's the case in which you have a conflict between people that you can't resolve because both sides think that they're motivated by love, but the other side is motivated by hatred. Now, it's obviously an error because you can't have a conflict in which both sides are motivated by love and hatred at the same time. One side is wrong, usually both. But what psychologists show is that motive attribution asymmetry lies behind almost every implacable hostility and conflict in human history of all types. So you look at it and you find it in the Balkans, you find it after the Rwandan genocide, you find it in the Middle East, you find it in most couples that are getting divorced. What they say is, look, I still love, but she hates. And she says, no, I'm the one who loves and he hates. And that's why they can't understand each other. They're making an error in the attribution of the motives of the other side. Okay, now why do I bring that up? Because near the end of this article that I read in 2014, the authors, they were talking about these foreign policy conflicts and pretty interesting. But then they said, and by the way, looking at data on the United States, the level of motive attribution asymmetry between Democrats and Republicans, this is 2014, is as high as it is between the Palestinians and Israelis in the Middle East. And I said, well, that's bad, and that's going to be really bad. And sure enough, the train came. Now, I was thinking about that. It was on my heart over the next couple of months, and I was doing what I always do, which I travel around the country, I give speeches to different kinds of groups, and I'll talk to any group that is interested in ideas. I talk to really very progressive left-wing groups on college campuses, not this one. I talk to business groups that are right in the center. I talk to conservative groups of activists, everybody. I don't care. I love ideas, and I love talking to people about these ideas. And so it was 2 months after I read that article thereabouts, in about April of 2014, that I was giving a speech to 600 conservative activists in New Hampshire. Really fired up, like wearing costumes of, three-cornered hats and the whole thing. I mean, really like hooting and hollering. And I got there a little bit early, and I looked at the program, and I noticed that it was 15 presidential candidates and me. So I'm thinking, well, that's a mistake. But they were all people that wanted to run for the Republican nomination to the presidency in the next election, which was going to be 2016. And a lot of them I thought had no chance. I mean, I was literally right before Donald Trump, and I thought, that doesn't seem right. That seems crazy. It's like, shows you how good a political prognosticator I am. But I started listening to some of these speeches that they were giving just to get a kind of lay of the land. I was listening, and they were giving 15-minute speeches, and they were doing what politicians often do, which is get in front of a completely sympathetic audience, because that's too risky to get in front of people who disagree, and say, everything you think is right, and all the other people who disagree, who are not here, are stupid and evil and hate America. Something like that. Right? One after the other, they were giving speeches like this because, they were trying to get the crowd fired up and to support their potential candidacies. One after the other after the other. Thought to myself, what can I do that none of them can do? And the answer is, I can say anything I think. I can say anything I want. I'm not a politician. I don't need any votes. I thought about it a little bit, said a little prayer, and I got up to give my speech. And I said, my friends, you've been hearing a lot of politicians telling you all the things that you think are right, and the people who are not here, who probably wouldn't even feel kind of safe here, that they're wrong and probably bad people and they hate America. Okay? But I want you to remember something, I said. Look, I agree with most of the political stuff that you're hearing here, but I don't agree with this characterization of the people who are not here, by which I mean political progressives. They're not stupid and they're not evil. They're just Americans like you and me who disagree with you on public policy. And if you want to persuade them, and that should be your goal, because newsflash, nobody in history has ever been insulted into agreement. If you want to persuade them, you can't do it by hatred. You can only do it with love. It was not an applause line. But there was an applause line that came right afterward from this lady. Because this lady was in the audience, and it was a very kind of it was a kind of a festive environment. They were all among their friends, and they were laughing and having a good time. And she yells out, actually, liberals are stupid and evil. And she got the applause. Now, I get it. I didn't feel insulted. I didn't feel attacked at all, because she was joking around. But you know what it made me think? See, it turns out that was the big epiphany. That was the moment to think differently, because at that moment, my mind went to Seattle. Why Seattle? Because it's my hometown. It's where I grew up. For those of you who don't know, Seattle is the most politically liberal city in America. My father was a college professor, and my mother was an artist in Seattle. What do you think my family's politics was? I'm the only conservative in the history of my family. They thought I was dropped on my head as a kid or something. They thought something was wrong with me. I was the oddball. I was the black sheep. I was the weird one. Well, let me tell you something about my parents. They weren't stupid and they weren't evil. They were great parents who brought me up with good values, to value education and hard work and personal responsibility. And they taught me my Christian faith, which is the most important thing in my life. And when that lady said that, she was insulting my mom. And I took it personally. Now, why was that important? Because actually, this is the secret, isn't it? People on your side are talking about your loved ones. Let me ask you this question, because this is a question that was on my mind wherever I was the next night in Kentucky or Pennsylvania or someplace giving a speech. And I asked the audience a question I'm going to ask you now. How many of you love somebody with whom you disagree politically? Let's round it off to 100%. The rest of you are on your phones. Somebody that you don't even know, with whom you agree politically, is trashing your loved ones. Why are you putting up with that? What is more important to you? Some random political opinion? Or the bonds of friendship and family? That's what really should matter to us. We're letting people trash our loved ones. We're letting TV commentators and politicians try to drive a wedge between us and our aunts and uncles and cousins and brothers and sisters. 17% of Americans today are not talking to somebody in their immediate family because of politics. Consider that. How is this possible? Well, that's the state we live in. So what are we going to do about that? What are we going to do? Now, let's think where we are. The mic's a little bit hot here. If we can turn it down, that'd be great. So let's remember, the problem is motive attribution asymmetry. It's being manifest in political polarization. Why are we doing this? Why? Now, some people will say it's because we have a lot of anger in our country. If you turn on cable television at prime time, if you dare, or if you look at political issues on social media, you'll see plenty of anger, lots and lots of anger. But anger is actually not the problem. Anger is a hot emotion. It's a basic negative emotion that starts in what's called the limbic system of the brain. Now, the limbic system of the brain is a bunch of tissues that were evolved more than 1 million years ago, and all they do is they process outside stimuli. One of the basic negative emotions is anger, and it's a really important thing because it allows you to stay alive in a lot of cases. It allows you to react appropriately to threats. It's also an emotion that says, I care what you say and do, and I want it to change. Interestingly, research on divorce and marriage shows that anger and divorce are uncorrelated. Uncorrelated. Now, that's good news. I've been married happily for 30 years, and I'm married to a Spaniard. And the secret to my 3 decades of happy marriage is the lack of correlation between anger and divorce. What's correlated with divorce? And the answer is when you take that hot emotion, that anger, and you mix in another basic negative emotion called disgust, and that turns it ice cold. That combination is a complex emotion that we define as social scientists as contempt. Contempt is the conviction of the utter worthlessness of another person. Contempt is something that if you display contempt toward one of your fellow human beings, they'll never forget it. They'll probably never forgive you because you're treating them as if they're worthless. You should never do this. Now, it's pretty interesting because I actually see this a lot in the literature, once again, on marriage. Motive attribution asymmetry, once again, is a mistake, and the way that we display it to each other when spouses are fighting and about ready to get divorced is by treating each other with contempt as if they were worthless. Why would you treat the most valuable person in the history of your life as if they're worthless? The answer is, it's a habit. There's a great marriage psychologist named John Gottman at the University of Washington in Seattle. He's been on my podcast before, and I asked him, how do you know if a couple's going to get divorced, or do you know if a couple's going to get divorced who are in your clinic? And he said, oh yeah, I can tell within an hour of meeting a couple if they're going to get divorced within 5 years, and I can tell with 97% accuracy. I thought, well, tell me what you see so I can never do that. He said, eye rolling. They roll their eyes at each other when somebody says something that they disagree with. Why? Because eye rolling is a sign of contempt. Now, you don't mean it that way when you do it. People do it all the time now. But when you roll your eyes or you're sarcastic, you're derisive, you're dismissive toward one of your fellow human beings, you're saying, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. That's worthless, what you just said, which is basically to say that you're worthless. That's how people receive that information. Now remember, motive attribution asymmetry says, I love, but she hates. How do I know she hates? Because she rolls her eyes every time I talk about something. She's sarcastic and dismissive with me every time. And that's what leads to divorce court, according to John Gottman. America is like a couple on the rocks that can't communicate. Think how people talk about politics in America today. How do they talk about it? They roll their eyes constantly. They're sarcastic. They say that's the dumbest thing they've ever heard. If you disagree with somebody politically, they'll say you're actually stupid. You're not stupid. You just have a different opinion. Why do we do that? Because it's a habit. And when I say we have that bad habit, I mean I have that bad habit. I was doing research on this project, and I thought I was just going to take a little look at my old TV clips. Like almost everybody in my profession, I do a lot of stuff on TV, and I went back and I saw myself debating another economist on CNN about something contentious. I think it was the minimum wage. You know, obviously, as somebody who's a free market economist, I'm against the minimum wage because I think it actually hurts poor people. She was on the other side of it. That's why we were on TV debating. And she made what I considered to be a particularly ill-considered point. And I rolled my eyes. And I tell you, I guarantee you she did not go home that night and say to her husband, I was debating Arthur Brooks on television tonight, and he was making some very good points. No, I guarantee you she went home and said, I was debating Arthur Brooks on TV, and he's a jerk. And every time she sees me on TV since then, she'll say, there's that jerk. And I earned that. And I'm sorry I did that. And since then, I've apologized, by the way. Because I didn't mean to say that she's worthless. I never meant to say that anybody's worthless. I don't think anybody in the world is worthless. I'm a Christian man. It's against my religious beliefs to think that anybody's worthless. To think it, let alone say it. And so look, I'm guilty. I have the habit too. So if we want to bring this country back together again, heal motive attribution asymmetry, dealing with contempt, we need to deal with the bad habit of expressing hatred that we don't actually even feel. How? How do you break a habit? Habits are so hard to break. Well, let me give you 90 seconds of important neuroscience, and I promise it won't hurt. All habits are governed by a portion of the brain called the nucleus accumbens. I already told you about the limbic system of the brain. There's a little piece of tissue about the size of the end of your index finger called the nucleus accumbens that has one job and one job only, which is to record a repetitive action, turn it into a habit, and free up the prefrontal cortex, your conscious brain, to do new stuff. So maybe when you're driving someplace today, maybe to Northwood University, a place you drive every single day, you don't remember driving there when you get there. It's like, where was I? You weren't asleep and you weren't drunk. The truth is that your nucleus accumbens drove you to Northwood University, and your conscious brain was freed up to do other things like talk on the phone or listen to music or listen to a podcast or anything else that you wanted to do. Think about your day. It's a miracle that we have this piece of tissue because it allows us to do good things habitually, but it also makes us do bad things habitually. If you ever tried to break a habit, you know how hard it is because you have this programmed onboard piece of hardware that's making it hard for you to change your behavior. So if you want to break a habit, you need to reprogram your nucleus accumbens. You can't do it with your willpower. For years, you heard that in the highly sanitized version of my biography, sanitized because what President McDonald did not mention is that I had a non-traditional college experience. I dropped out of college when I was 19. Dropped out, kicked out, splitting hairs. And I went on the road as a musician for 10 years to support myself for those 10 years, which my parents called my gap decade. So I have a kind of a checkered background, to be sure. But during that time when I was making my living as a musician, I had a very bad habit. I smoked cigarettes. And I didn't want to smoke cigarettes. It was expensive. It was dangerous. One night when I was engaged, before I got married, I accidentally set the bed on fire. And I thought, well, it's one thing if I kill me, but I'm about to get married, so I might as well not kill her. And so I said, I'm going to quit. And I was going to use my willpower. I won't smoke. I won't smoke. I was smoked. Came back to it again and again and again. Now somebody told me, no, that's not how you quit smoking. You can't will it away. I said, what do I do? Give me the secret. He said, you have to, every time you feel the urge, you simply have to stop for as long as you can and then do something else at exactly that moment. Now, the person who was giving me this advice was not a neuroscientist. But what he was telling me was to reprogram my nucleus accumbens. Every time you want to do something bad, you simply put time in so you can consider the decision, not make it automatic, and then do something else. So every time you want to smoke, stop and have a drink. This is a bad advice. So we're back to the habit of expressing contempt. We do it automatically. We roll our eyes. You're watching television. You see some politician you don't like or some pundit that you don't like, and they say something you disagree with, and you roll your eyes. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. You know it's not the stupidest thing you've ever heard, but that's just the way that we habitually express ourselves. So what do you do in person? Same thing. That's how you make enemies. That's how we're ripped apart. Look, presidential candidates that are having a debate on television roll their eyes at each other, creating hatreds among their followers and among even themselves. So what should you do instead when somebody disagrees with you politically, when you want to roll your eyes? How should you act? I asked this question to the wisest man that I know. This is somebody I've been working with intensively for the past 10 years. And he's not somebody who has anything in common with me at all. It's His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. This is somebody I've written with, I've interviewed many times. He's become a teacher and a mentor and a friend to me. Those of you who don't know who the Dalai Lama is, he's the world's most prominent Buddhist. He's 86 years old. He's Tibetan, but he was exiled out of China. Tibet is a part of Red China. And he was exiled from China by the Chinese military in 1959, rolled across silenced, sent into exile, poor, to be forgotten. And over the next 60 years, instead of being forgotten, he's become the world's most respected religious leader. How does a poor exile go from being nobody, rolled over by the world's most populous military, to become the world's most respected leader? And the answer is not by expressing hatred and contempt. No. By expressing something else. And so I asked him, Your Holiness, I said, when I feel contempt, disagreement, anger, hatred, what should I do instead to break the habit? And he said, show warm-heartedness. And I said, what else you got? Because that sounds weak. But it isn't weak. Think about the story I just told you about His Holiness the Dalai Lama kicked out of his homeland. Thousands of his fellow Tibetans murdered by the communist Chinese, to be forgotten. Not once has he expressed contempt toward the communist Chinese. Not once. He says he prays for them every morning, that they'll have good and happy lives. That, my friends, is true strength. Contempt and hatred is for weak people. Strength is love. So how do we do it? How do we do more of that? I said to him, tell me how, Your Holiness. Give me a lesson. And he said, think of a time when somebody told you something hateful and you responded with love. Think of a time you did that in your life and how it made you feel, how it lit your heart on fire. That's very good psychology, by the way, because you can remember a time when you had a special feeling, you will actually recreate the act spontaneously. There's a lot of literature that shows that is exactly the right psychology. So I said, okay, let me think about a time. And I remembered a time when somebody treated me with just unilateral hatred, and I accidentally answered with love. It was in 2006. It was a long time ago. It was the first time I ever published a book that anybody ever read. See, I'd written a lot of books, but they were so boring that my family didn't read them. Nobody read these books. But finally I read a book which was boring, but it just hit the news cycle in the right way, and it changed my life completely. It was about charitable giving. Right? I mean, how interesting can that be? But it was actually about how differences in politics and religion, how it affects charitable giving. And somebody picked it up, and it was in the New York Times, and President George W. Bush called me to the White House to talk about it. And he was holding the book or something, and suddenly everybody was buying the book, and all the TV and radio was calling me, and my life changed. I never had any experience like this. It was weird. But the weirdest part was this. I started hearing from total strangers. It's very easy to get my email. When you're a college professor, as we all know we're college professors, you just go on the website and you get the email of the professors. And it turns out that when you have a best-selling book, lots of people do that. I started to get dozens of emails a day from people who read the book. If they liked the book, they liked me, and they told me, which was great. And if they didn't like the book, they hated me, and they told me that too. And that was really not fun at all. So I remember one day, probably 2 months after the book came out, I was working in my office. I was in Syracuse at the time. And I get an email from a guy. It's a Wednesday afternoon. And it starts off like this. The guy's in Texas. And the guy says, Dear Professor Brooks, you are a right-wing fraud. That's a bad way to start email, by the way. But I kept reading because I'm a good sport. And I noticed that this email is 5,000 words long. It's going to take me 20 minutes to read it. But I'm plowing through it. And I see that this guy is refuting everything in my book, detail by detail, vitriolic details. He says, do you realize that the columns in table 3.1 are reversed, you moron? Stuff like that. I mean, little details with great anger. But it's like this database and this chapter and this line. It's amazing how detailed it was. And I realized that I was feeling gratitude because he read my book. I mean, nobody ever read my books. Nobody. And this guy spent probably a week reading my book and tearing it apart. And so I said, I got nothing to lose. I don't know who the guy is. I'll never see him. I'm going to tell him what's written on my heart right now. So I write to him, Dear so-and-so, I know you hated the book. You made it very clear that it's terrible and I'm terrible and everything's terrible. But I want you to know it took me 2 years of my life to write that book. I put my whole heart into it, and you read every word. I'm really grateful to you for that. Thank you. Send. I go back to work. I'll never hear from the guy again. Nope. 15 minutes later, ding, there's his email coming up. And I'm thinking, now I'm very apprehensive, like maybe he wants to kill me or something. I don't know, right? But I open it up, and here's what it says. Dear Professor Brooks, the next time you're in Dallas, if you want to get some dinner, give me a call. What happened? What happened? I mean, he was like my mortal enemy, and now suddenly he wants to have supper? What happened? He didn't expect me to read it. He was just expressing himself. He didn't expect me, if I read it, to do anything but be defensive, and if I reached back out to him, to insult him back. That's how the world works, an eye for an eye, at least rhetorically. And when I answered him with a little bit of gratitude, a little bit of friendship, maybe even a little bit of love, it totally changed the dynamic. But here's the most important thing. It changed my heart. I felt so much better after I sent that email. If he had never even gotten back in touch with me, it wouldn't have mattered. I felt good as a result of that. By the way, I never did meet up with that guy and have dinner, because probably I'd be chained to a pipe in his basement right now or something. But it was amazing. It taught me this, and I remembered that, because the Dalai Lama said, remember a time. And I remember that time, and ever since, I remember that time. And it changes my behavior. And my heart gets set on fire. And I'm a happier person every time I react with love when somebody treats me with hatred. It's an opportunity. It's entrepreneurial in the startup of my life. So how are you going to do that? How are we going to do that? Let me, in my remaining couple of minutes, give you a little bit of homework on how you can do this yourself. How you can treat hatred with love and save America in your own way. Here's your first assignment. Actually, here's your first non-assignment. Here's what you shouldn't do. Agree. People think we gotta, let's just agree to disagree. Let's just be agreeable. That's just total mediocrity. America's greatness is based on competition. We want competition in politics. It's called democracy. Nobody wants to win an uncontested election. We want competition in markets. It's called capitalism, which is what lifts everybody up, especially the poor. And we want a competition of ideas because that's the most important competition of all. Do not agree. Iron sharpens iron, as the Proverbs say. You are required as a person of learning from this university or involved in this university, as a member of this community, to disagree when it's time to disagree. The question is not that we need less disagreement in America. We just need better disagreement. And that leads to the first real assignment. What are you going to do? Number one, turn off the outrage industrial complex. Look, 93% of Americans hate how divided we've become as a country. 93%. It's a huge market opportunity. But here's the bad news. 7% don't hate how divided we've become as a country. And they have a lot of power. And they have a lot of money. And they're trying to actually get more power and money. When you hate, somebody else profits, and it's not you. It's somebody who's getting clicks, somebody who's getting advertising dollars, it's somebody who's getting votes, it's somebody who's getting followers, somebody who's getting jollies, just from you hating somebody else. But you are not profiting in any way, shape, or form. So what do you need to do? Turn off the hate machine. Now, it doesn't help to turn off the hate machine on the other side, because you already had that off. Turn off the hate machine on your side. Stand up by shutting it down. Don't read the columnist who says those things that are kind of your id. Turn off the television show primetime host who says all these things you feel sort of like forbidden delights. Turn it off. It's not helping you, and it's hurting our country. That's how you stand up to it. That's assignment one. That's a pretty easy assignment. Here's a harder one. Thank you. Here's a harder one. Thank you, Maureen. Here's a harder one. Go find contempt and run toward it. See, now, that's a weird thing to do, right? Because anytime I say that there's a pathogen, we've been dealing with a big pathogen in this country for a couple of years. By the way, one side note, you said that 2 years ago you would have been underwater here. One thing I want to congratulate you on is that 1 year ago you were not in lockdown like the rest of the country. This is a great place for that. So we have a little bit of expertise in this country on pathogens. And one thing that we all know is stay away from pathogens, right? Stay away from pathogens. Well, contempt is different. It is a cultural pathogen, but it's your opportunity to show transcendence. I've had a lot of missionaries in my family. I got missionaries on both sides of my family. And it's one of the weird thing about missionaries is they're always so happy, but they're getting constant rejection. You know words that nobody has ever said in history? Good news, there's missionaries on the porch. Ever, right? It's like, pretend we're not home. Look, we know what's going on here. But they're so happy. Why? You want to know why they're happy? Because they're bringing truth where there's lies. They're bringing light where there's darkness. And that is a joyful thing to do. That's why missionaries are happy. Now, what's my point? You get to be a missionary, whether you're religious or not, by bringing love where there's hate. And that means you need to go running toward the contempt. Go looking for the contempt. Go looking for it on social media. Go looking for it in your community. Go find it and surround it with love. That's your opportunity to get better and to make everybody better, and you'll be happier as a result. Now, it's hard to do. For some people, it's like, I don't know where to find it. If that's the case, you need more friends. You need to get out of the house a lot more. If you go to church, go to a different church, one where people disagree with you. Go to a different part of town. Go to a place, maybe a city near you, where people think in a different way. And engage people, not in agreement, but in love. Now, it's such an interesting thing to do. The John Gottman, the guy I told you about, the marriage counselor, the way that he brings couples back together again, who only know how to treat each other with contempt. He says it's a communication problem, so he makes them carry a list around that they write on a little piece of paper and a little pencil, and every time they want to say something nasty to each other, they write it down, and they have to say 5 loving things first. Right? Like, she picked me up late again. I'm going to lay into her for that. But first, you look beautiful tonight. And it was really very thoughtful of you to leave dinner out for me when I came home late from work last night. And I want you to know I love your mother. That's too much. Anyway, you get the picture. Right? And by the time you get through those 5 loving things, you don't get to the 6th because you've changed. You get the point, right? So this is what you need to do too. If you're in an environment of contempt, do a 5-to-1 list. I actually have committed myself to this on social media. I'm not posting all day long. Who's got time for that? But I have to have an active presence because of the work that I do. And I've committed myself, before I say anything critical, to always say 5 nice things first about that particular topic. And I just don't get to the critical thing anymore. It hurts my following because that's not as fun in a highly polarized environment. But I feel better, and I'm making the country better by having this particular point of view and this attitude. Do that. Go running toward contempt. And here's your last piece of homework. The third one, which is the nice one, the fun one, the one I love the most. Show more gratitude. Sometimes I look when I'm looking at the debates on TV today, the only one thing that the hard right and the hard left can agree on is that America is a crummy country that used to be good and isn't anymore. It's the craziest thing I've ever heard. Look around us. Look what we're talking about. We're the most prosperous, upwardly mobile, charitable country in the history of the world. We got problems, yeah. But look at us. Look what we can do. Look at the freedom that we have. I could post on social media right now that I think the President of the United States is an idiot. And there's no jackbooted thug. And there's no knock in the night. I have complete freedom, and so do you. And very few people in this world have this. God bless America. So show gratitude. Don't get involved in conversations about how bad this country is. Don't talk this country down. Say thanks for what this country is. Gratitude will truly lift you up. There's a lot of studies that show, and one of the things that I assign my students at Harvard to do, I teach a class in happiness at Harvard, and one of the pieces of homework I give them is to make a gratitude list. Sunday nights, list the 5 things you're most grateful for in your life. Monday through Saturday, every day, spend 5 minutes looking at your list. On Sunday, update your list. At the end of 9 weeks, you'll be 25% happier. It's free. Gratitude is free. And gratitude is what we need because it's the appropriate response in a world that's so filled with trouble, in a world that's so filled with hate, in a world that has so little freedom, that we have these freedoms. Look, still, this is the country that everybody wants to come to. And if we can't thank God and thank each other, including people who disagree with us, for this country, that's on us. So be grateful. And let's think about it in this particular way as I close my remarks. I travel a lot, And there are certain times, when I'm tired, wherever I am on the road, I'll just go into whatever house of worship I can find. I'm a Catholic, but sometimes when I'm in the South, for example, I'll go into these Southern Baptist churches. And I was in a Southern Baptist church in the South, in Alabama or Mississippi someplace. And I saw this sign that really struck me. It was a sign for the I was going to say parishioners because I'm Catholic. It was a sign for the congregation, but not as they came into the church. It was a sign over the door as they were going out to the parking lot, and for they could read before they left church. Really struck me. And here's what the sign said: "You are now entering mission territory." I thought that's a very good lesson for all of us, whether we're religious or not, right? Do you think we have a mission to make America better? Do you believe that you have a mission to make America better, to make the world better, to fight the contempt, to fight the hatred, to bring more love? Of course you do. So let's do that. Let's do that. And let's think today, let's imagine today that over the signs to this gym at Northwood University on this beautiful night, the sign says, "You're now entering mission territory as you leave tonight." Join me in that, and let's fix America together. God bless you.
Well, that was inspiring. Thank you, Dr. Brooks. And now comes the point where our audience can participate and interact. We will have a microphone set up for people. If you want to ask questions live, step up to the microphone. Is there a microphone coming? And you can queue up at the microphone. You can also send questions to us on your phone, and I'll receive them up here, and I'll transmit those questions for you. So take a few minutes to formulate your questions, and we'll get started.
All right. Got the big blue chairs here, Dale.
Okay. Okay. We have a lot of questions.
Yeah. We got one at the mic.
We got one at the mic. We'll start with the mic.
What is our individual responsibility to uphold freedom in America?
Great question. What is our individual responsibility to uphold freedom in America? All of us have a responsibility to fight for the rights, not just of our own, but of other people. I think everybody here would agree that freedom is one of the great distinguishing characteristics of this country. Our obligation is to look where other people are oppressed, where other people don't have the freedoms that we have, and to defend their particular rights. Furthermore, the expression of those rights extends to people all around the world. One of the greatest things about, let me put it in a different way, in my view, one of the great lies that is being propagated today inside the United States is that the United States is not a force for good in the world. The United States is the greatest force for good in the world. It is the only truly reliable source for good in the world. We're not perfect. We've done a lot of things that we shouldn't have done, and we've made a lot of mistakes, to be sure. But look, let's be realistic about this. Freedom, opportunity, enterprise, the American military making it possible for us to trade around the world. These are liberty issues. And until we actually stand up for it here and around the world, like President McDonald's remarks about the Ukraine, this is a perfect example of us standing up for what's right, what's clear for people around the world, because they are in fact our brothers and sisters. My view is that this is our fundamental difference as people and one of our greatest truly moral rights as a society. Thank you for that.
Yes, sir.
I'm a very strong Christian, so I got a question for you.
Yeah.
To book what you said, because you mentioned how this world has a lot of hate, which it does, and I agree.
Yeah.
How would you expect like a strong Christian like me to read your book?
Yeah.
How would you expect that in your opinion?
Well,
I'm curious.
So in other words, how would you read it as a Christian, or why would you read it as a Christian, or how would you read it as a Christian? Well, the same way that I'm a strong Christian myself, the same way that I read everything, which is everything is with a Christian lens, as far as I'm concerned. What comes first for me in my life is my Christian faith, then my family. Only after that actually comes my work, and way, 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 way down the line comes my politics. And so I'm looking for all different ways that as a secular person in the world, I can sanctify my work and lift it up. I'm always looking for a better way for me to be excellent at my job, and at the same time have people say, that man's a Christian. Say, this is the deal. And this is the reason I wrote Love Your Enemies, is because Love Your Enemies is the most subversive teaching in human history. Truly goes contrary to our animal instincts. It's why we have this incredible ability to change the world as human beings as opposed to just living as animals, because we can actually elect to do something like loving our enemies. And for me, that's part and parcel with my Christian faith. I would read, for you, I would read my book in the same way that you would read Pride and Prejudice and War and Peace and the Brothers Karamazov, and to think about how can this make me better at living the faith that is at the center of my existence. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Another question from our online board is somebody who's been inspired by your latest book, From Strength to Strength, asks, could you tell us more about your advice to kick our success addiction?
Yeah. So in this new book, and a lot of you have a copy of the book, and for many of you, there was a copy on your chair, and I hope you enjoy it. I wrote it for you. What it is basically your happiness 401k plan. It's the way that you can invest in your happiness so that every year you can get happier, whether you're 20 or 40 or 60 or beyond. This is a guide based on the best neuroscience and social science on how you can become happier as people. I wrote it for myself, actually. And one of the things that I talk about is the interesting fact that strivers, the hard workers, the most ambitious people, they sometimes struggle the most. And the reason for that is that when a party is over, you really notice it if it's been a good party. And if you're a striver, wow. I mean, look, if you never do anything in your life, you don't know when it's over. But if you do a lot and then it finishes, it can be pretty hard. One of the biggest problems is that real strivers, they tend to get addicted to success. They become workaholics. They become addicted to success. This is a very easy pattern to fall into because our society rewards hard work. We valorize hard work, and that's a really good thing. But to become addicted to success is like becoming addicted to drugs and alcohol. I've met any number of people in my research who choose the 14th hour of work before the first hour with their children. That's highly addictive behavior. And so one of the things I talk about in this book is offering that up as something, as a sacrifice, as something that we want to get beyond, to think about it, to actually meditate on the nature of that, to create real relationships. I talk in the book about going from deal friends to real friends. And it's only love that surrounds that or anything else that can actually kick that addiction or any other addiction in our lives.
Thank you. And we'll go back to the mic for the next question.
Hi.
Hi.
So you talk about the difference between love and hate and how to basically approach your neighbor. What would you say or advice you could give to a family member that counts somebody's political beliefs so strongly in how they judge someone?
Yeah. Well, the key thing is that probably reasoning with somebody under these circumstances is not something we've done very often. What we find is that, family, which is so critically important to people, it becomes a really tense thing. But one of the things that I often do when I'm talking to people, when I'm counseling people, and they'll say, I can't talk to my father because he's such a conservative and I'm such a progressive. I hear this from my students all the time. I say, have you ever talked to your father about that very fact? And say, I feel like our politics is making it impossible for us to communicate with each other. This really makes people open up because there are very few people who say, yeah, that's exactly right. I would prefer to sacrifice my family relationships because of the Republican Party. Very people would articulate it in that way. And when it's not stated, look, putting something on the table can be very, very bracing. There's a reason that when couples go for counseling, they're required to say what they actually think to each other, looking at each other in the eyes. It's funny, I bring people together in my experiments. I've brought strong Republicans and strong Democrats together to see how they can get along. And the first thing that I ask them to do is to talk about the love for their children, because that actually moves the conversation to a part of the brain where love is located. It's called the ventral striatum of the brain. And it's very hard to hate each other once you've been located in that part of the brain. Then after that, I'll have them speak openly about the fears that they have of people on the other side and to humanize people on the other side. The best way you can humanize somebody who's dehumanizing others in your family is to say, I feel like this is coming between us, and I don't want to sacrifice our relationship over this. What can we do to actually get beyond this? Please, please don't let me lose this relationship because of politics. It's not worth it. It's not worth it to me, and I pray to God that it's not worth it to you. This will soften it in a very, very big way. Thank you.
All right. I actually was very curious if you've seen the documentary, The Social Dilemma. It's on Netflix. I watched that over winter break, and I really thought it was impactful to a lot of the things that are going on today. And so how would you say the impact of social media on our ability to love our neighbors? Because, now today we aren't communicating face-to-face, but we're communicating via phones, via laptops, What does that path look like down the road for us as a civilization?
Yeah, that's a great question. Social media is something I deal with a lot in my research, and I talk about it a lot with my students as well. Social media has become a substitute for human relationships as opposed to a complement to human relationships. At any time that you have a substitute, a technological substitute for human beings, you got a problem on your hands. Now, the brain chemistry behind this involves a hormone, a neuropeptide that functions as a hormone called oxytocin. Oxytocin is produced by the human brain. It's intensely pleasurable because it bonds us to each other, and it happens in response to eye contact and touch. When you're spending all day on the internet, all day on social media, you starve yourself of oxytocin, and you're a miserable person. You get yourself into a lonely, miserable state. This is the biggest problem during the coronavirus epidemic, is that people would be maybe locking down with somebody else, but not even, it's like ships passing in the night, and they don't have enough contact with others. And so they turn to social media and they binge on social media, and they wonder why they're getting angrier and less happy and more lonely. It's because they're starving for oxytocin. One of the best things that you can do if you use a lot of social media is to turn it off and actually look somebody in the eyes and contact, physical contact. You can spike your blood oxytocin levels with a 22-second embrace. And so go have a 22-second hug. I recommend every 2 hours a 22-second hug. You heard it here. If you're married, it's very good for your marriage. I suggested that to my teenage daughter, and she said, "Get away from me, I hate you." But that's a different. But you get the point. I mean, in other words, social media is actually is hurting our brains, and until we actually use it judiciously, and I think a lot of young people are actually doing better than people who are in their 20s and 30s at this point. We're going to wind up with more and more of an epidemic of loneliness and the polarization that we see. Thanks.
I want to go back to a question that we received online here. How do you recommend that Americans deal with issues where there cannot be a set of facts that are agreed upon? And some say that we live in a society where fact and truth does not matter. How do we fix that?
Yeah. So the war over what the facts are is largely being fought in 10% fringes on the internet. My facts versus your facts, alternative facts versus true facts. This is actually not what about 80% of the population is dealing with. When I look at actually how people see, look, there are people who are conservative, there are people who are liberal, but there's a lot of things that we actually agree on in what's true in this country. And a lot of what's being blown up as the implacable differences between people in this country is largely fodder for selling newspapers, for getting clicks on the New York Times website, for Fox News and MSNBC. Most of us are not under the illusion that certain things are facts and other things aren't. But if you look at the internet, especially when you're looking at about politics, they're trying to fire you up about lies on the other side. And there are lies on the other side, but it's not lies on most of the other side. It's lies on 5 or 10% of the other side. Focus on the people who disagree with you, who are not lying, who just see things a little bit differently than you, who see the same facts but interpret them in different ways. And then think to yourself, what is it about that way that they see the same facts where they might be right? Here's the interesting thing. I have a lot of opinions. This is the stuff that I talk about and I study, etc. But I'm 100% sure that some of my opinions are wrong. I just don't know which ones. So what do I need? I need to be surrounded by people who disagree with me, and I need to hear their perspective. I don't need people who are lying to me, but that's easy to avoid. It's easy to avoid the most hostile pundits on the other side that would convince me of the craziest things. I just want people who are kind of like me, but on the liberal side. And they see things a little bit differently about the role of government. They see things a little bit differently about foreign policy. They see things a little bit differently about capitalism. And sometimes I agree, and sometimes I even change as a result of that.
There's another question here. You gave us a little bit of your history, your younger self. And this person asks, given the work that you've done, what advice would you give to your younger self?
Yeah. I think the advice I give to my younger self is actually to listen to other people more carefully and spend more time loving others and looking for the good in other people. I think in my 20s, I think I was a little bit too rigid in the way that I saw the world, and I could have been a lot happier had I actually been more flexible in my thinking. Now, that's part of being in your 20s, right? But the truth of the matter is that I'm so much happier now than I was before. And if I'd spent less time thinking about myself and more time loving other people, I could have been a happier person back then. I could have gotten to the finish line a little bit earlier than I did. So that's one of the key things I would have taught myself for sure. I also would have come to Northwood University earlier. Probably would have come here to college.
So earlier you talked about like how you were at the convention, the conservative convention in New Hampshire, and everyone was getting rowdy about how they hated the other side, right? And I feel like that's something that we fall into, like a bad habit of supporting those who don't support our opponents. So my question is, what is a good strategy that politicians can use to win nominations without using the disgust and hatred that their supporters want to hear?
Yeah, this is an interesting thing, and this is the big problem that you've identified. Because if you actually want, particularly in national races, look, state and local politics is better. State politics is it's tough, but it's better. You know, I know, it's like, So, it's like he's on the campaign trail right now, he's getting killed. I get it, but when you're in an environment where everybody thinks more or less the same way and you need their support to win a primary, it's very easy for you to become more extreme than you actually are. But nobody ever said, I sure am glad I lied a lot. Nobody ever thinks back on their life and said, I sure am glad I lied a lot. So one of the things I talk about with politicians, national politicians, I've worked a lot on with politicians at Capitol Hill, is to say to yourself, you know what you're willing to win for? What are you willing to lose for? What are you actually willing to lose for? And I hope it's that you would lose before lying. And lying means saying things that you don't think are true. It doesn't mean that shading the facts, and it might be true, and I might as well say it. Look, if you don't believe it and you say you believe it, you just lied. There's a commandment about that. It's a serious business in our society, in most of our embrace of faith where that's the case. And so that's the key thing. And it's interesting because I've actually experimented with politicians where I say, try this, because I do a lot of work on communications. And I say, look, you're not going to agree with everything I think, but I promise I'm never going to lie to you. I promise I won't lie, even though you'll disagree with me sometimes. So no matter, even if you disagree with me on certain things, you'll always be able to trust me. And what that does is it brings in lots and lots of people from the middle. That's what people in the middle really, really want to hear. They will vote for people with whom they disagree if they don't think they're liars. Because we are so jaded, we're so cynical about politicians all the time, and we think that they'll literally tell us anything that we want them to say. And we get used to it, and we cheer it. But I've heard people at NAACP meetings, for example, cheering conservative Republicans who said, you're probably going to think I'm crazy for some of the things I think, but you're not going to go home thinking I'm a liar, and you're not going to go home thinking I don't love you and your family. That actually can work. Thanks. I'm not running for office too, by the way. So, yeah.
Good afternoon.
Hi.
Hi. I was wondering, and if everybody else is all right with it, if I had 20 seconds to introduce myself, and it would back up the rest of the question, give some context.
Of course.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Colin. Nice to meet you all. I just wanted to let you know a little bit about my childhood. I am the oldest of 5 kids. They're all younger than me. They're amazing little kids. But I was also, the one carving the path for them. I was the one making the mistakes. And then in turn, my parents would, show them why I was making those mistakes. And I cultivated that, and I became a really, really, hopefully good brother, is what they could say. And was camp counselor for a few years and raised some really nice kids. And I saw a lot in kids that I wish I saw in adults and people in places of power. So this question that I just kind of decided to write over there in the chair and bring up to you all today, and I'm hoping that you have an answer. I would really be happy if you did. It is, from a person that comes from a background of leadership like myself, how would I, as a leader, inspire others to imagine and be creative once more and to embrace their individualism instead of imitation?
It's a great question, and it's a question as a father at some point you're going to embrace over and over again. The greatest leadership that most of us ever get is being parents. And the key thing, and the way the most important thing to keep in mind is in cultivating leadership in other people, is to look for what's actually most important and not be spending time on things that are less important. This is one of the things that we all learn as parents, is we spend time haranguing our kids about, just hypothetically, grades. And then we realize that what we really want is our kids to be compassionate and honest and faithful. And so focusing on what people really can do to lift themselves up into their best self and focusing on that, that's the way to do it. It sounds to me like that's how you were a good brother, and my guess is that's how you're going to be a good father and maybe a good CEO. Thank you for that.
Here's a question online. What does freedom mean to you?
Yeah, it's a non-trivial question. What does freedom mean to me? What does freedom mean is really the question. And there are really two definitions of this classically. So in Western philosophy, during the Enlightenment, freedom was freedom from coercion from other people. That's what freedom meant. And so if you go back to the founders of the United States, Benjamin Franklin, for example, was a great Enlightenment leader expressing these Enlightenment ideas for the very first time in this new American context. When he talked about freedom, when Patrick Henry said, give me liberty or give me death, he wasn't saying, give me freedom to have all the stuff that I want. He wasn't saying, give me freedom to have 4 houses and a boat. He was saying, give me freedom from people standing in my way such that I can't pursue my happiness. That's what Patrick Henry meant by that. Freedom for America's founders was freedom from coercion, freedom from meddling, freedom from the government or anybody else taking away my ability to pursue my happiness, to raise my family, to lift other people up to the best of my ability, to worship as I see fit, which was a non-trivial thing in America then, and it's a non-trivial thing around the world today. Unfortunately, we have a newer definition of freedom that's come about largely in the 20th century, which is not freedom from, it's freedom to. It's freedom to exhibit license, freedom to have things that belong to other people, freedom to have a certain set of entitlements. Now I recognize that there are human rights, and human rights are critically important. But the classical definition of freedom, as far as I'm concerned, is and must remain in the American conception, that's which we took at our founding, and that is my definition of freedom.
Very good. We'll go back to the mic for the next question.
Mr. Brooks, you're a role model and inspiration to many people, not just in this country, but across the world. And my question to you is, who is your role model and why?
A lot of people have had an incredible influence on me, to be sure. A lot of people have had an enormous spiritual and moral influence on me. My father was an incredible influence on me, intellectually and morally. He was an incredibly upright man. He was somebody who never compromised his own morality. He died relatively young. He died at 66 years old. But he was somebody that I still think about every single day. And it's the most amazing thing, is a role model. I say almost every day, would my father be proud of me? Would my father? Now, you never quite get away from that. All of us, especially men, we're always wondering if our fathers would be proud of us, even long after they die. But I say that because he's somebody whose judgment mattered to me and continues to matter to me. I mentioned His Holiness the Dalai Lama. That, as a Catholic, you'd think that the world's leading Buddhist would not be my role model, and yet he's somebody who's taught me a lot about life and love. He's taught me that happiness truly is love for other people, and furthermore, that love is an act of will. It's not a feeling at all. That love is to will the good of the others as other people. These are two people that have had an enormous influence on me. And the last person who's a real role model to me is the person to whom I've dedicated the book that all of you had on your chairs. I say is my guru, which sounds like I'm an adherent to some sort of Eastern religion. But what happened was that when I was studying with a great teacher in southern India, a great teacher, a guru himself, a yogi by the name of Sri Nochur Venkataraman in Tamil Nadu, in a state in southern India, in a little village. I was sort of sitting in in front of him, asking him. He was asking me questions about my family and giving me great moral lessons. And he asked me, who is the person who leads me on paths of righteousness as a Christian man? Who's the one who makes sure that I get to church on time? Who is somebody who calls me out when I am not behaving up to my own morals? And that's my wife, Esther. She truly leads me in paths of righteousness. So the person to whom I dedicated this last book, my guru, is the person at whom I will glance and give my last look as I take my dying breath. And my everlasting love is my wife.
Dr. Brooks, you said that we should never agree, but we should also focus on 5 positive things before we consider one critical thing, and we won't reach that one critical thing.
Right.
So how do you suggest we actually and constructively disagree with someone else?
Yeah. So there's all kinds of ways that we can find positives in others with whom we disagree. A lot. You can find positive things in any human being on earth. I mean, sometimes it might be trivialities, but in point of fact, you can find wonderful things that you can say about other people with whom you disagree vociferously, with the greatest strenuousness. But that's the key, is actually looking for those things, even if you state those things inside your head. One of the things that I do, I mean, I've had to, in my career, I've had to do a lot of debates, not just on television, but I've done formal debates in front of big audiences. And what I always do is I pray for the person that I'm about to debate. It probably makes me a different kind of debater, to be sure, but I'm asking that I will treat the person with love and as a human being with equal dignity to me, notwithstanding the fact that we disagree on policy issues. And I won't engorge those policy issues beyond their moral bounds. Just because we disagree on economics or foreign policy doesn't mean that that person doesn't have the same dignity. He's not a child of God just like me, and I love that person as a result of that. So that's basically how to do it. Now, it's interesting because I talk about that with my son, who's a Marine. Now, he's an infantryman. He's actually a scout sniper in the Marines. They're not taught to love their enemies very much. They're not taught to say, gee whiz, the guy who's, doing all these terrible things over there is America's enemy. He's taking away freedom from other people. He's subjugating whole populations. What a great guy. But he does pray for them too. He prays for the people that he has to fight. And that's an extraordinary power that we can all have as human beings, is to lift ourselves up beyond the hatreds that would animate lesser species. So that's actually how I recommend doing it. Thank you.
Now, I have to say there are a lot of great questions here, but we really have been pushing the limit as far as time is concerned. So we'll take one last question from the mic.
All right.
For people who aspire to share ideas like you do, what would you recommend? And what were some of the best sliding door moments that took you from musician to professor to writer?
Yeah. So, the world of ideas is the most exciting thing. And not everybody thinks that the idea of writing a column every week in a magazine and traveling around and being on, Delta Airlines and going to and sleeping in hotels sounds really exciting. But I tell you, it's the best. It's the absolute, not the Delta Airlines part, but it's phenomenal because, sharing ideas is something I truly love. And so the way to do that is to simply learn as much as you can and avail yourself of what the educational opportunities in this country. In most places around the world, the idea of becoming somebody who shares ideas for a living is completely unthinkable. It's like, sorry, you're a plumber, if you're lucky. Which, by the way, is great if you want to be a plumber. But if you want to be an idea person, it's not so great. This is the only place in the world where you can imagine something as bizarre as what I do for a living and actually do it. And so the key thing is preparing yourself as assiduously as you possibly can, to learn as much as you possibly can, to be a sponge of all knowledge, and then take absolutely every opportunity to share ideas. It went little by little. It's interesting. I was most interested in music, classical music, all the way through my 20s. But I got so interested in ideas, basically because I realized that capitalism had lifted people up all over the world. I became a social scientist, by the way, because of an inspiration from the world's greatest composer of music, who's Johann Sebastian Bach, in my view. And Bach was asked, why do you write music buckets and applause, and this guy's great. It's like, yeah, woo! So but Bach was asked before he died, why do you write music? And he said, the aim and end of all music is nothing less than the refreshment of the soul and the glorification of God. And I wanted to answer that way about my work, and I wasn't doing it with music. So I got my PhD so that I could do it with ideas. Offer it up, offer the ideas for the good of humanity, learn as much as you possibly can, and then just have this big adventure. That's basically how it works, and then lay your life out and see all the wonderful things that the American life will bring to you. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank you very much. We're not quite finished here. I want to invite our academic vice president and provost to the stage, and we have something planned.
All right. Thank you.
Let's hear it for Dr. Matchek. Thank you for moderating. Thank you again, Dr. Brooks.
Thank you.
You've helped us develop robust skills to subvert the culture of contempt, and you've given us some homework that we will take to heart. As you can see through our OmniQuest programming, the concepts in Love Your Enemies have permeated our intellectual community this academic year. Having you on campus this evening has brought the concepts to life not only for our students, faculty, and staff, but also our community. And for that, we are extremely grateful. We have a very special way to end this evening's program. For the first time, we will present what will become the annual Capitalism and Freedom Award. Northwood University has established this award to recognize individuals whose accomplishments best exemplify the values, thinking, and actions outlined in Milton Friedman's classic work, Capitalism and Freedom, and honor the lifetime accomplishments of Milton and Rose Friedman. We believe it is imperative that these ideas be continually championed, or we risk losing the freedoms we so enjoy. If you could please join me at the podium, Dr. Brooks. On behalf of Northwood University and its Robert C. and Janice S. McNair Center for the Advancement of Free Enterprise and Entrepreneurship, we are pleased to present you with the inaugural Capitalism and Freedom Award for your scholarly writings, influential books, and leadership of the American Enterprise Institute. The Conservative Heart, The Road to Freedom, and the subject of tonight's program, Love Your Enemies, represent your positive influence and advocacy for the values promoted by Milton and Rose Friedman, as well as those of Northwood University. The award is presented on this day, March 17, 2022, to Dr. Arthur C. Brooks, a true champion of capitalism and freedom.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it so much. Thank you. Are we done? Okay.
You may have noticed the beautiful sculpture on the table on stage. In addition to the citation you received, we have commissioned a solid bronze replica of our beloved statue of Milton and Rose Friedman, which is situated in the heart of our campus in Founders Garden. This is only one of two such statues in the world, with the other being at the Friedman's home, Capitef. We appreciate the generosity of Pam and Tim Nash in helping make this possible, and we will ship the replica to you, Dr. Brooks. It's much heavier than it looks. And we truly hope that it's a special memento of your time with us here at Northwood University. Tonight has truly been a celebration of Northwood University's values and experiential learning. We'd like to thank Dow for helping underwrite this event and the other donors who've made it possible. Following this event, Dr. Brooks has graciously agreed to do a book signing, and we ask that you join us in the area to the audience's right. And we also have a reception upstairs in Panning Pavilion with snacks and a cash bar and even some green beer in honor of St. Patrick's Day. And now in closing, let's all heed Dr. Brooks' call to action and subvert the culture of contempt and be radical proponents for love and decency.
Thank you. Thank you.